That has never been figured out. My grandmother's full blood.
Okay.
And my grandfather is part Cherokee, so I don't know how much. So
Okay.
we were always taught that people are people.
Okay.
Nationalities mean nothing. And that's the way we've always lived.
Yeah. Did you find yourself, when you found out that you're coming to Company I, did you know that it was based, a good percentage of which was made up of Native Americans?
Well, when Charlie and I joined Company I, they were more Indians than any other nationality.
Yeah.
And, but they looked at the war much different than we did now.
Explain.
We were there because we were drafted and had to go.
Okay.
They were there because they wanted to win the war. That's the difference.
Okay.
And I Company was different than K Company or L or any of the rest of them, because as a new man came in, one of the old men would grab him and take care of him like he's his own brother or his own son. Yeah. And a guy by the name of Ramsey Knight grabbed hold of me and told me, he said, "Stay with me, Shorty, and I'll take care of you." And he did. And right from the day he was killed. Yeah. He was killed in the NCO, and after the battles of Anzio for 4 months, we were told, and I was told this now several years ago, by General Ed Byrd, and also by General Fredericks, that we had more casualties in 4 months on Anzio than the entire South Pacific had from the time General MacArthur said, "I shall return to the Philippines," until he actually returned. We had more casualties than the entire South Pacific had in that time.
Do you feel like you guys were kind of thrown into situations other groups didn't have to deal with?
I feel that we were part of the biggest snafu that was ever concocted.
Which was?
They went into Anzio for one reason, to cut Italy in half and separate the German army into two parts. They sent the manpower in there, and they sent us in the right direction, but we had no equipment. We went in 5 miles, we ran out of ammunition, food, everything else. So we had to stop and wait for all that to come up. In the meantime, Germany builds an iron ring around us, and we couldn't get out. Okay. Just that simple. It was the biggest snafu in history, in my opinion.
Looking back on it, have you had time to research that to find out where that snafu occurred?
Well, a number of people have been blamed for it. I forget the general now who took the blame for it, but our corps commander was Mark Clark.
Okay.
And since he was over the entire corps, then he would have to stand the blame. He would have to take the responsibility.
How long was your drive from the beaches stalled because of that?
Well, we didn't get enough ammunition out, or the people there before me didn't, I guess for over a month. And in the meantime, Germany was running troops down there and building the defenses around us. And by the time we got ready that we could go, we couldn't get out. That's right.
Now, was this the first battle that you were in, Anzio?
That was the first battle.
And you said that the person that was your mentor, the guy that had grabbed hold of you and took care of you, was killed at Anzio. So how long did you know this man?
Please?
How long did you know this man?
I would say roughly 3 months.
Okay.
But I learned that, now he is from Okima, over here in Okima, Oklahoma.
Okay.
And a Navajo Indian. And there was, at the time Charlie and I went in there, there's 12 or 15 of us went to Anzio. I went to I Company. And I noticed, as they went down the line, one of the old men would grab one of them and take him aside. And directly one of them grabbed me. And now, in K Company and L Company, as I understand it, talking to their commanders and that, they had put 2 new men in one foxhole, 2 old men here and 2 new men, and they didn't even them out. And they lost a tremendous amount of men. Where if we lost 1 man a week, we thought we were doing bad. Yeah. They were using 10 or 15 a week, and they thought they were doing fair. Yeah. And
how much did your survival? How much of it was due to the fact that somebody grabbed a hold of you in those first few days?
I would say well over 50%, and the other 50% goes to Bill Whitman's ingenuity of how to fight a war.
Okay, tell us about that.
Because Bill knew what other people were going to do before they knew it. Bill had a sixth sense that you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
He has took us through many battles where we'd stop before the battle started and back up, go around a different way, and then we'd find out in front of us was one hell of an ambush. And now he hadn't sent patrols out to find out or not. That was in his head somewhere. Some say it was just an educated guess, some say it wasn't. but it was always right.
Yeah.
It was always right. In fact, we saw a piece in Stars and Stripes back in 44, 45, where somebody in division headquarters said, if this man is such a great leader, why hasn't he been promoted from captain? Why has he been a captain so long? And the answer to it was, I'm not sure who it was, the Eagles or one of the higher ranking people said, we can't afford to promote him. If we do, we have to take him off the front line. And I'm telling you, I like it when they said that hurt. But they said that he was so smart and he had saved so many lives, but that sixth sense he had, that they couldn't afford to take him off. And I credit that with saving my life many, many times.
Give me one of the examples that you can think of. I mean, you mentioned that.
Just out of Anzio, up toward a little town called Velletri, we came upon a series of steep hills with valleys between them. And they decided to attack these hills head on. And in our sector, K Company would take the valley to the right, I Company would hit the hill. And the 1st Battalion would hit the next valley and the next hill. Well, when they said that I Company would hit the hill head on, Bill Whitman kept shaking his head no, and Colonel Ahern, our battalion commander, he told Bill, he said, there's nothing you can do, you have to do it. Bill said, you want the hill. He said, I'll take the hill, but damn it, we'll take it my way. And so I stood and listened to him, but I thought, well, he's just sticking his foot in his mouth, you know. But then as we jumped off to hit the hill, Bill veered off to the right and followed the 1st Battalion through the valley. Okay. And we come up on the hill from almost behind it. And there was so many 88s lined up around that hill that none of us would ever get alive.
What is an 88?
An 88 is the greatest artillery piece that was ever invented. Okay. And it could be used for anti-aircraft, for anti-personnel, anti-tanks. It could be used for anything, and it was the most powerful at that time. And they had them lined up around that hill that we wouldn't have stood a fighting chance. Bill knew that was there, but he had never sent patrols out to find it. There's no way he could have known it was there, but he did know it was there. Yeah. And that happened just time after time after time. After a while, we got to a point that we more or less expected it. It was just second nature. And when Bill would, Bill was good enough that when one of the other companies in the regiment got in trouble, they'd put somebody else in charge of I Company and take Bill over to straighten it out. In a few weeks, Bill would be back, the trouble would be gone. He'd have it settled out. And his men had so much respect for him that if he had a very dangerous mission, he'd ask for volunteers to be, if he needed 2, he'd get a dozen. Okay. Everybody wanted to do what Bill told him to, and that was the secret to success, I guess, in some respects. But the little sixth sense that he used, that saved more lives than I could ever figure. Wow. That's right.
Now, he sounds like a pretty much of a standout in your mind as a heroic figure, as somebody that really stands out from that time. Who were some of the other fellows that you remember that just jump out right away?
Well, the one fella other than him that I really admired was a multimillionaire. The 1st lieutenant was a multimillionaire.
Really?
His father was the inventor of the 7-Up soft drink. He owned the 7-Up company, all the bottling companies. He owned the entire works. Bill was his only child. Bill's mother died, or David Wilbur was his name. Okay. And David's mother had died when he was young, so he was the only heir. Well, we were at, I believe it was a town called Venesey up in Alsace when Wilbur got the word that his father had died. So it left him everything. And now I don't know whether they wouldn't send David back or he refused to go back, but he stayed with us. Okay. At Nuremberg, a sniper killed him. And he was the type of guy that he wasn't a brilliant mind. He wasn't a great warrior of any kind, but he had a lot of respect from his men. If he wanted something done, all he had to do is ask, and there's a dozen men ready to do it. And
what got that there? What made it to where you felt that way about him?
That is something I can't answer. You meet people, or I find it in my life that I meet people, and I often say that to meet him is to like him. Okay. some people, you can know them all life and you don't like them, although they did nothing to you. And Charlie Harper's one of these boys. If you know Charlie very long, you'll like him.
Yeah.
And that's the way David Wilbur was. And we called him all kinds of names and that. He walked with a bounce, and for a long time we called him Springboard Lil. And he got a big kick out of that as we did. And then after that kind of cooled off, he was Daddy Wilbur from then on. He was everybody's daddy. So we went into Nuremberg, and we sent the rifle platoons across a real wide street, a brick street, and they got across pretty well. Then the mortar section went across, and a sniper hit pretty close to 2 or 3 of them. And I backed off and moved a little to the south, where I could get a shorter distance across the street, where part of a building would stick out in the way. Mm-hmm. And I sent my first machine gun squad across, and nothing happened. I sent a second one across, and the sniper got pretty close to one of them. So then I was wondering what I should do, and Wilbur says, "Make up your mind, gunner, I'm going." And he took off across the street, and he got about in the middle, and the sniper hit him squarely through the side of the head, just below the helmet. Hit him almost in the temple. He died instantly. Yeah. When he fell, and I saw what would happen, I know I couldn't help him. So I went across myself in the same place. And I got on the other side, and I'm huffing and puffing and panting and scared to death. And I told my first squad leader, a guy by the name of Griffin, I told him, "Griffin," I said, "I want you to look at the back." I said, "I'm either hit or I've crapped all over myself, one or the other." And he looked at the 2 little bullet holes through my canteen. That was water running down the back of my leg. Well, like everything else, it scares the devil out of you, but in a day or two, it happened so much that we more or less forgot it. Wow. But David Wilbur was killed there. Yeah. And the day before that, just a few days before that, David had made a statement that he could play any musical instrument except the sliding trombone. Well, we started looking around to try to prove him wrong. Uh-huh. And one of the boys come up with a long trumpet that Julius Caesar's people used back in those days out of a museum. A 16 feet long trumpet with no valves or anything on it. They brought it in, we give it to Daddy Wilbur and told him, "You made your brags, now we want to hear something played on this." And he picked it up and puffed on it a time or two and started playing Tag and Rag. And he played it from one end to the other.
Wow.
And then that night, we captured a little corner of a outpost of the Germans and that, and the building they were in was a warehouse full of champagne. So after we get in there, we're all sitting around drinking that champagne, and another outfit had cut us off. They'd squeeze us out. And I remember Wilbur sitting there playing the piano, and he'd take a drink of champagne. He's playing a tune about the King of England that I won't say on tape. But he sang that same song, I guess, for a good 5 or 6 hours and never did sing the same verse twice. And the more he played and the more he drank, the further he'd slide down on his seat. Uh-huh. And the last I remember, when I went to sleep sitting against the wall, David Wilbur sitting flat on the floor playing the piano. Then about 2 days later, he was killed. And that was a blow to all of us, but something that couldn't be helped.
I think you were telling the other day when we were talking casually, you had said something about someone by the name of Huckleberry.
Huckleberry Scott.
Yeah.
Huckleberry lives at Stillwell, Oklahoma now. He's in very bad shape, mentally and physically. He's had several strokes and heart attacks. And he had an accident in which a young lady was killed. And after that, Huckleberry disappeared for several years. Whether he was in jail or what, I don't know, but he was blamed for the accident, even though the woman was driving. Mm-hmm. When they cut his seatbelts loose and got him out of the car, he was on the passenger side, and she had been thrown out and was hanging in the guardrail. Well, somehow his head hit something, and they had to drill holes and pull his skull up. And after that, his memory was awful bad, and I know I called him a time or two, and he'd call another friend of his to come in and tell me what his phone number was because he couldn't think of it. Little things like that, you know. But Huckleberry is one of, again, he's a Cherokee, and was a fine person as far as a soldier is concerned. The thing that was interesting about him was when I met him, he had light blonde hair and blue eyes, and he carried papers to prove he was full-blood Cherokee. But his face is white as a man's white shirt. Yeah. So he said he was albino. Well, it went on for 35, 38 years, and we came out here and met him. And Huckleberry today, his face is real dark, darker than Ted Smith.
Okay.
His hair is coal black. His eyes are brown. And his teeth are perfectly straight. They did protrude. We always told him that he could eat corn off the cob through a picket fence. But now he never went to a dentist or nothing. His teeth straightened up themselves. And the boys that over here at Ramada, they wouldn't speak to him. They thought he was an imposter. And then one day I was telling his wife, she's a little blonde-haired white girl, and she said, "Mr. Kelch, let me show you some pictures of Huckleberry taken over 15 years." And you could see him changing right down the line as she laid the pictures out. And when she got the last one, that's Huckleberry today. The first one was Huckleberry yesterday.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wild.
That's right.
You said he was someone that would go out and kind of do reconnaissance?
Right.
Tell us about some of that.
The first time I went out with Huckleberry was on Anzio. And I was green. I was pretty scared. And we crawled out through a ditch to where the ditch intersects with another ditch. And the ditch is 4 feet deep, maybe approximately. And we crawled out through there, and we come to this corner. Huck shot look at me, and I stopped. And he motioned me, "Come on up." And around the corner, now this is 11 o'clock in the morning or 12 o'clock, noon. Sun was shining bright, you know, and you could be seen for miles if you got on top of the ground. And so Huck motioned me up, and there was 3 Germans in an outpost. They were laying on a blanket and had a blanket over top of them, and they were letting us snoring up a storm. They were just snoozing along. And of course, nobody got out in the daytime. You couldn't, you'd get killed. So they were just having a nap. Huck looked at me and said, "Let's play a trick on them jokers." And I thought he was going to capture me, you know. But instead, he takes 2 hand grenades out, hooks his thumbs in them, pulls the pins out and dropped them, and he held the safety levers. And he walked right around that corner, laid them down between their heads, and then run like the devil. Them 2 hand grenades went off, and he looked at me and says, "I bet them jokers got a headache."
Oh, man.
Of course they didn't, but they'd have a head.
Yeah.
But Huck was that type. And he and I were in a foxhole one night, pouring down rain, and the ditch we were in, the water was running down there. And we hear a sound, going splash, splash, splash. My hair starts standing up, and I know my face got white. I was sweating all over, and in the middle of February, colder than blue Hades, snow on the ground. And but it was raining, and you hear the splash, just even as could be, splash, splash. I pulled that Tommy gun up and he hollered, "Halt!" And splash, 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 it kept coming. He hollered a second time, splash, splash. After the second time, he ripped away that Tommy, brrrr, and the splashing stopped. Huck said, "Well, I guess we got him, but it was so dark we didn't go out to see." Next morning, we got up and looked out in the puddle in the creek. Was a big bullfrog on a fly's back with his whole stomach blown away. Huck had shot a bullfrog in the middle of the night.
That's wild.
Then there was another time we was out, and it was early in the morning. The fog was coming up. You could see nothing. And Huck stopped, and the guy behind him, whoever he was, Huck told him, said, he was talking to this guy, I sneaked up close so I could hear him. And he said, "They're all around us." He says, "I can smell them suckers." And I thought to myself, man, what have I got myself into, you know? But directly old Huck spun around, and that Tommy gun of his ripped away, and through the fog I could see something standing up. It looked almost like a man. And Huck raked that thing twice, and he raked it the second time, and his Tommy gun went empty, and he started to hit it again. And one of the guys crawled over to it. There was a big snag of a tree. It had the top blew off. He shot and he fell off. But nothing, he was never scared. He never had the shakes or nothing else. To him, he was doing a job like you and I go to work every morning. That's just the way he did it.
Now, you said when you first came in there, the attitude... Okay. No, no problem, no problem. Said that the fellows in company I had a different attitude than a lot of the other fellows, including yourself. Did that pretty much last throughout the entire war?
That lasted among the Indian boys as long as I knew them.
Okay.
Now see, all these years, I thought of myself as a part of the white race.
Okay.
Because I am white. My skin is white. Everything about me is white. But as I look back into my history, I see so many Cherokees in there that I have to figure I'm not all white.
Yeah.
And Huck is a full-blood Cherokee, like I said. And I called his brother Charlie and talked to him That's been about a year ago. And I called his sister Polly. He has a sister, Polly No Fire. And I called her a number of times. I never got her. But I got Charlie several times, and he put me on to where to find Huck. And Huckleberry was extremely good soldier. He was one of the best. But as you look back among your Indian boys, the Navajos, the Choctaws, the Chickasaws, and that, he wasn't much more than average, because they were all that good.
Really?
It wasn't like a bunch of us white boys going in there. Like I said, we went in because we had to. They went in because they wanted to. That was the difference.
What do you think it is that was it so like they had something to prove?
No, I don't think that so much. After talking to a lot of these people here, so many have told me that the reason they went into the Army because they got 3 meals a day and a suit of clothes, something they couldn't get at home. So most of them, if they got 1 meal a day, they were lucky. And then if they got in the Army and seen how well they were treated and how well they were respected, which they were not respected in civilian life, you know that. And then they started trying to prove that they could be as good as the next man. And if you look back through I Company's history, or K or L, or any part of the 45th Division, you'll find a tremendous amount of your medals not given out were given to Indian boys, more than white boys, because they had that ability about themselves. First of all, they could walk through a field of tin cans in the middle of the night and you'd never know they was out there. I could take one step and everybody knew I was out there. But that's the way they had lived all their life. They had lived mostly on meat. You know, a lot of people don't realize it, but back quite some time after World War II, among your reservation Indians, their last span was 35 years. See an old man sitting around a campfire in front of his hoogan or his wick up, and he has no teeth, his hair is solid gray, and he can't see in that. And if you talk about him, oh, he's a real old man. He's 36 years old, or he's 34 years old. And it was kind of pitiful in a way.
Yeah.
But like I said, I did spend a lot of my young life on the Navajo reservation, up on the Arapaho, and around the lowland Apache, not the Chiricahua, the lowland Apache. Like Ted Smith. Ted Smith is Yavapai. Okay. And that's the ones I became.
Did you find yourself wanting to maybe bring out a little bit more of your Indian heritage when you saw and were looking up to these people?
No, I don't look at myself as being part Indian. I look at myself as being another human being.
Gotcha.
My grandmother was a full-blood Cherokee, and many people I've got in contact says she was a princess. Right. Her father was either chief of the Cherokee or the chief's brother or something close. But now she never mentioned that. She told all of us boys and girls, when you look out over a group of people, that's what you see as people. You don't see blacks, whites, yellow people, or red skins. All you see is people, because that's all that's out there. We're all people. And she taught us that from the ground up, and that's what we believed in.
What kind of attitude did you run into from the rest of the Army? Did it mirror your own?
No. In fact, I think I was very fortunate in the Army, because, you know, a lot of people go in the Army, they get a lot of bad jobs in that because they're new. I went in the Army. Now, I stayed here in the States for 10 months before I went overseas. You know, I was never on KP. For some reason, somewhere along the line, they skipped my name on the list, and I never served on KP. However, just before I went overseas, they did put me in officer's mess. And I told the first sergeant, I said, you don't want me in officer's mess, I'm just too clumsy. He said, no. He said, you'll do all right. And I said, you want to bet? So they took me to officer's mess and gave me the job of serving the food. Long table lined up. General Parker's there. He was our division commander, and all of his underlings, and they had their wives with them. They were dressed like they're going to a ball. And I thought to myself, I got to get away from this bunch of people some way. So I figured, best way to do it is right off the top of your head. So they decided we'd have spaghetti and meat sauce. Well, the guy in front of me comes out and he has 2 big platters of spaghetti. I come out behind him, I have 2 big platters of meat sauce. Well, he walked down one side and I started down the other side, hooked one foot behind the other, and down the table went the meat sauce. Needless to say, I never went back to the officer's mess. I had meat sauce all over everybody. But now, even at that, you know, I never went on KP after that.
Okay. How about for the rest of the guys that as you call them, the Indians that were in your company. Did you ever notice a different attitude from some of the other fellows that were outside of your company towards them?
No, to all the people I can remember over there seeing, they regarded each other as just another person. They were never mad at the guy because his skin was a different color. Of course, now we didn't have blacks or nothing like that. All we had was Indians and whites. And later on, we did get a Chinese boy. But after had our skin saved by the 442, an all Chinese outfit or Japanese outfit, we learned to respect them too. But there was never any barriers toward. The only thing that our people resented was every time we had a Jewish holiday, they'd pull all the Jewish boys off, take them back, and they'd have a big party. They'd have beer and ice cream and popping out. Nobody else got up but the Jewish boys. And I had a boy in my section, his name Crabtree from Flatbush, New York. Crabtree said, I'm going to break that ring. He said, I'm going to get some of that. And I said, well, Crabtree, I said, well, he was a buck sergeant. I said, Sergeant, you can do whatever you please. I don't care. So they came up, the next time we had a Jewish holiday, they come up and they read off the names they wanted to take back. At the bottom was Sergeant Crabtree. And I went over and I said, Crabtree, I said, how'd you do that? He said, Sarge, he says, I found my way out, finding your way out, your job. So I said, okay, so I went and talked to the company clerk. The company clerk said, yes, he came back there and he convinced us all that he was Jewish and he was not Catholic. Well, from then on, we called him Crabstein. He was not Crabtree anymore. But he got shot up somewhere up around Rome and was sent home. And the day he got wounded was the last time I ever saw or heard from him. Whether he's still alive or not, I don't know.
You know, you talk about the war, and you have a lot of fond memories, warm memories, and you talk about with a lot of humor about the things that have happened.
Right.
And then, like this last story, and then he was shot and wounded. I don't know if he's around anymore. Is it hard for you to keep that positive attitude about the things that happen? I mean, obviously there were some bad times too.
No, I guess maybe I'm a little different. Maybe I take things a little more to heart than most people. But since World War II, there hasn't been a week gone by that isn't in my dreams. I'm always fighting the Battle of Anzio, and I fight that time after time. I see the same guys die every night.
Okay, what are the things that you see in your dreams about Anzio?
Well, I can remember the time that different boys were killed, different fellows, some were in my section and some were not. But when you see a guy fall and you run to him, you try to help him, you turn him over. Maybe his face is missing, or maybe half his head is gone. That's something you don't forget. But now, I saw it happen so many times with Anzio. And I walked up behind the guy once on the breakout of Anzio, and I'll never forget as long as I live. He was sitting behind a mortar in a little draw, and he was shooting at a machine gun nest that was hitting our first platoon. And he was dropping the shells in both hands. And as he sat there in the fire, I just took one of my machine gunners back. He'd been badly hit, and I took him back and was running to catch up again. And as he was firing away there, I seen a figure to the right come up and shot him. And shot him with a burp gun, and he must have been hit a dozen times. He never knew what hit him. And I turned to fire at the figure over there, and I seen him falling. And both of my machine guns had trained on him. And they cut him, evidently they cut him to pieces. I never went over to see, but I did go to the boy that was behind the machine gun. Now his last name was Patton. I don't know his first name or anything, but he was one of those mortar men. I was the machine guns at the time. And he was just shot so full of holes that there's no way he could ever live. And so I went on back to my machine guns and took care of my men the best I could. But things like that, you don't forget them. You don't forget them at all. And I was in the Battle of the Caves fighting when we just broke out of the Iron Ring and went into the Battle of the Caves. And I'm sitting, and a guy stepped off of a cave and aimed a Tommy gun. I mean, he said something in German. I don't know what it was, where he said surrender or what, I don't know, but I just froze dead still. I was afraid to move. And a boy from one of our rifle platoons, I don't know who he was, but he jumped off the top of that cave, landed right on the guy's back, and it killed him with a trench knife. And I'm standing there looking at that, you know, and can't do nothing. There's nothing I can do. But things like that stick with you.
I'll bet.
Yeah.
Now, you talked about having a hole in your canteen, obviously from a sniper shooting at you. It was that
Right.
close. Guy jumping off the top of a cave
Yeah.
to stab someone that's just about to kill you.
Yeah, that's right.
Were those the closest calls that you had, or did you actually
Oh,
get hit during the war?
Definitely, I was never hit, no.
Okay.
I did lose my left eardrum. But I was in a dugout at Willengooth, Alsace, just up a few miles from Premierfontaine. And there's a big heavy-set guy by the name of Griffith. We had two guys, Griffin and Griffith. Well, Griffin was the character that I always hung around because he had a lot of fun out of him. But Griffith was a very serious person. But he weighed about, he must have weighed 250, 300 pounds. Big, fat guy, you know. And he wasn't strong, he was just big and fat. And we had made this dugout, we put logs over it and threw dirt over it to keep the shrapnel out. And a little entranceway to crawl in on your hands and knees. And we were in there sound asleep. Well, some shells come in and blew some of the poles off the top of it, and the dirt came down on us. We got out and looked around a little bit and went back to sleep. We didn't have any roof on our dugout anymore, but so what? And a little later on in the morning, before it came my turn to go out on the guns and stand guard again, a 70mm mortar shell came in that hole, right through them holes. But it landed between Griff and the wall. I went about 30 feet in the air. Griff was blew to smithereens, but he did a piece of him all over the hillside. But now, if that had been a little skinny guy in there with me, what would have happened to me? I'd have been gone too. Or if it had lived a little bit to the right and hit between us or hit between me and the wall, I would have been gone. But there's so many little things like that that happened to me that it makes me wonder, why did all those other men die and I came back? I was at Mischheim, Germany once, and we was going to attack around Mischheim and into a winery, the basement of a winery. And we didn't know that there's a mortar down there. And we get on just out in the middle of open field, and we started to go over a little hill and down into the valley to the winery. And this mortar opens up. And there's a hedge fence there, and I just backed my machine gun, told them, dig in and cover that where the mortar shells are coming from until we can locate him. Well, while I put my field glass was trying to locate him, a mortar shell hit in front of me. Well, I felt something tug at my helmet, and I felt it burn, just a little blood come out, just a scratch across the top of my head. And I just went ahead looking, because I knew he wouldn't fire for another few seconds, you know. And the guy came up to me and said, Harry, I said, you all right? And I said, yeah. I said, I'm all right. Why? What made you say that? He said, I'd seen you grab your head a few minutes ago, and said, look at that fence post behind you. And there's a fence post that big around, had the top cut right off of it. Now, a quarter of an inch or a half an inch to the left, my left, and I would have been gone. My head had been tore off. But little things like it happen so many times, and I come home, I never got a Purple Heart. I got a Bronze Star, but I never got a Purple Heart. I was never hit.
What did you win your Bronze Star for?
Well, we were fighting at Munich, Germany, and at 9 o'clock in the morning, they sent the 1st Battalion of the 180th across an airfield. Well, you know, it's nothing about airplanes. There's nothing to hide behind, and once you start, you're out in the open. You're anybody's target. Yeah. Well, they just about wiped out the 1st Battalion. A Company lost 2 platoons of tanks. And so about 1 o'clock in the evening, they got us together and said, I Company will go across the middle, K&L will go on the right, and we'll use what's left of the 1st Battalion for reserve. Well, Charlie Harper was with me, and we went out there, and we get almost to where these burned out tanks were sitting, and the machine guns hit us. We dove for cover, we tried to hide behind the grass blades and everything else, but Charlie and I got behind the burned out tank. And we'd peep out, and them rifles, those machine gun bullets just bounce off that tank, you know, one after the other. And man, we were getting pretty scared. And I told Charlie, I said, let's just sit down there and see what we can figure out. I said, we got to do something. And so we sit down there, and directly I hear somebody holler, is anybody there? Is anybody there? And we looked out, and up along toward the front of this tank was a staff sergeant laying there with both legs missing at the knees. But he'd crawled out of that burning tank, I guess, and it burned his knees so bad that he didn't bleed to death. So we dashed out and dragged him behind the tank. We gave him he'd been laying there since 9 o'clock in the morning. So we gave him a drink out of our canteen. I lit him a cigarette. And his name was Patrick. Now, I don't know whether that was his last name or his first name, because I never heard of him after that. But I told Harper, I said, we got to get him back to the aid station. He's going to die if we don't. And Harper said, well, how are we going to do that? How are we going to get back there? I told Charlie, I said, well, you take care of the section while I'm gone, and I'll go get some litter bearers. Surely they won't shoot at medics. So I took off across the airfield. As I ran, I looked down, I'd see the tracer go in front of me. They go between my legs and back them in. The more I looked, the faster I ran. Believe me, I was carrying the mail. And I got over into some old German barracks at the edge of the woods, right at the edge of the airfield. And I walked in, and there was a major and a first lieutenant that I never knew. And they were sitting at a table, and they had some maps out, pouring over these maps. They got you guys lined up against the wall. And I told them, the first lieutenant, the major didn't, he just ignored me. I was nobody. And I told the first lieutenant, I said, I got a man out there with both legs shot off. I've been laying there since 9 o'clock this morning. And I said, we got to get him out. I said, I need at least 4 litter bearers. And he said, well, I said, they're lined up against the wall right there. They said, they saw you come across that field. He said, I'll bet you $1 to a donut you won't take anybody back with you. And I said, well, if they don't do their job, we don't need them, right? He just looked at me and grinned. I told the first 4 of them, I said, come up and go with me. And that first old boy looked at me and shook his head no. And I rocked the bolt back on my Tommy gun. And I said, well, we don't need you then. And I put it right down in his face. He jumped up. And then the other 3 got up and went with me. Well, we went back across that field carrying the litters and that, and they had the crosses on their chest. And those machine guns shot at us all the way across there. And I thought, well, now we're out here. What the hell we going to do now? We got more men out here now. We got to get back. So we put the guy on the litter, and I decided we'd start back. So we took back. And once we left that man on the litter, the Germans never shot at us. Wasn't one shot fired. We took him all the way back. I left him there in that same building, and I left. And when I left, the first lieutenant was standing back by the door. He looked at me and said, Sarge, said, you're in trouble? I said, what do you mean? He says, you'll surely get court-martialed for that. He said, not only you risk your own life, but said you risk 4 other men's lives. And I said, you forgot one thing. I said, I saved one man's life. And I just turned and walked away from it. And out there we went, and as nightfall came, why the Germans, they started backing up, and we started going forward, and we got into town and got it all done. And while we were in Munich, the war ended. And we're sitting in old German barracks, drinking all the booze we could find and waving at all the pretty women. And here come a Jeep up and looking for Sergeant Kelch. And I said, that's me. He said, you're wanted back battalion. And old Harper and another guy looked at me and said, Harry, I said, you've had it. I said, maybe so, but I said, I did what I thought was right. And I went back there, and instead of court-martialing me, they gave me a Bronze Star. And I had 82 points, and to be in the first bunch going home, you had to have 85 points. Well, that Bronze Star made me 87 points. I was in the first group going home.
That was a pretty good trip.
that is what if you couldn't call that sheer luck, or somebody up there was looking over me or something, that really happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
What do you remember about Dachau?
Dachau? We fought right up to Dachau. Now, 157 actually took Dachau. But I went through Dachau right with the first wave, and because we were on that flank. And that was the most horrible sight you could ever see. That was to see people laying there starved to death. And they had rows of them stacked up like cordwood. They were going to take it in the woods and put tar pitch on them and burn them because they couldn't bury them fast enough, and they couldn't burn them in the furnaces fast enough. And after it was over with, we came back, or me and my boys come back. 157 stayed around the camp. But as I came back, here come up a 2-star general in a Jeep, and a driver. And the colonel, he was from 157, I don't know who he was, but he was a colonel, he had a bird colonel. And this lieutenant come up, this 2-star general come up and told him, so the colonel said, take your men out of here so my men are taking over. And that colonel, man, he got pretty hot. He told that general, he said, you ain't taking over nothing. He said, I was told to take this camp and hold it. He said, I took it, now I'm holding it. And that general told him, said, well, said, you're looking at a court martial, you know that. And that old boy pulled out a 45 pistol and said, you're looking at a 45. And the colonel got in his Jeep and drove away. And it wasn't too long ago that I saw that in the military magazine, where that colonel pulled a 45 on a 2-star general and run him out of the area. And when they tried to court-martial the colonel or took him back for disciplinary action or something, and they told the 2-star general to shut up or he'd be court-martialed.
Really?
Yeah, because he was trying to take credit for something somebody else did. Now, as I understand it, he was from the 42nd Division, the Rainbow outfit. But that's just one of the things that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there was one other comical thing that happened that we might bring out.
Okay.
And that is when Rome fell. We fought up to the gates of Rome and they stopped us dead still. Rome's an open city. Nobody fought inside the city.
Okay.
So I come and fought right up to the gates of Rome and they stopped us dead still. They said, sit tight. The English will be the first to enter Rome. So the English come up, they marched through us, went into Rome, and we're still sitting there. And whoever our commander was then, our battalion commander at the time was Colonel Croix. And he said Colonel Croix just told him that no GIs from the 45th was to enter Rome. He said, get your men back here in the column of twos. We'll march them around the west side of Rome and park on, he showed them what the hill was. So we'll park on top of that hill until we can find out what they're going to do with us. So we went up there and we parked on top of the hill, and word came down that, it came down 3 or 4 times, that no GI from that company or that battalion would enter Rome. Well, we're sitting there drinking that old Italian vino, and the more we drank, the braver we got. And the runner come down and he said, well, I said, I'll tell you what this is, but it's for what it's worth, but it won't help you any. And I said, well, what is it? He said, Pope Pius XII said if you get 30 men together, he'll see 30 of you. He'll give you an audience. But we weren't allowed in Rome, so what we could do. And Opie Griffin, the guy from Conyers, Georgia, he might have been a little drunker than I was. But anyway, he said, Harry said, let you and I go down and see the Pope. So I said, you got yourself a deal. So it was getting pretty dark, so we sneaked off and went downtown. And we got into Rome, all right. We got into the Vatican. We went from door to door, knocking on doors. Well, those people are speaking Italian. We don't speak Italian. So I finally Opie finally knocked on one door. This guy come out in a business suit, said, what would you gentlemen like in perfect English? And I said, well, the Pope said he'd like to see some of the GIs, and we're here to see him. So he said, well, His Holiness said 30 men or more. And I said, well, we made the trip down there. I think he said you should at least have the courtesy to come out and say hello. So he said, just a moment. Then he motioned for us to come in. So we walked in. The Pope, he gets out a big platter of fresh ham, pumpernickel bread, a couple big bottles of wine. We drank all the wine that man had. But we hadn't had fresh meat since we'd been over there. So we sat there, I guess we stayed there about 4 hours. And he took us through the museum and showed us all the vehicles the Popes rode on and that. And then we sneaked back into the area, and nobody knew the difference. But the funny part of that was, of all the people we had, 99% of them were Catholics, and the two people went to see him, one was a Baptist and I'm an LDS. He never saw a Catholic. And I'm telling you, Captain, whoever the captain was at the time, it wasn't Whitman, it was somebody else. And next morning we were getting ready to move out. And he said, he got I company together and said, just come out here in a bunch. I said, don't get in formation. I said, come out, I want to talk to you. He said, I want to commend you guys for being so nice. He said, you could have sneaked off and went into town and got drunk, but you didn't do it. Said, you didn't cause me a lot of trouble. Said, you did what I told you to, and said, I want you to know I'm real proud of that. And I looked at Opie and I said, I'm proud of you too. And that was the last that was ever said.
Okay.
But we were the only 2 guys to see the Pope. And he's a Baptist and I'm an LDS. Neither of us are Catholic. That's right.
Now I heard you talking, I think it was yesterday, saying that you hadn't had a drink, because that was your escape, it sounds like, during the
Yes.
during the war, but
Well,
you hadn't had a drink since.
I got mad at the bartender. He sold me a bottle of hot beer, and that was in December of 1946. I've never had a drink since then.
Okay.
And in February of 47, I made a bet with the guys working at a foundry, and the wife and I had been married for about a month, and she just bought me a carton of cigarettes and a new cigarette lighter and that. And yeah, 2 guys I was working with in a brass foundry was telling me how hard they'd tried to quit smoking, they just couldn't do it. I said, oh, hell, if you don't want to smoke, I said, throw your cigarettes out the window and forget it. So the guy told me he'd bet me a cup of coffee that I would smoke before he did. A cup of coffee cost 4 cents at the time. So I took my cigarettes out and blown them out the window, and he threw his out the window. Well, 3 days later, I caught him smoking in the John and made him buy me a cup of coffee. You know all the guys sitting on the floor then? They said the reason I wouldn't smoke is I was too cheap to buy the coffee. That's what they told me. But from that day to this, I've never smoked a cigarette.
What have you been doing since the end of the war?
Since the end of the war, I put in 31 years with General Motors. I gave them 31 years service and 4 heart attacks. 4 major heart attacks. The light heart attacks I can't count.
Oh, okay.
But 4 major heart attacks. And I retired in 1978, 55 years old. And before that, I would take 6 weeks a year, and the wife and I would come out through these areas like this. We stayed in that same motel a dozen times, but we didn't know any other people lived here, you know.
Yeah.
And we'd come out through here, and we'd spend 6 weeks just wandering around, side roads and that. Never carried a road map, and we still don't to this day. We don't carry a road map. And then when was forced to retire due to a heart attack and that, put me in the hospital. I was in the hospital all summer, and when I got out, I got to feeling oats again. I got to feeling pretty strong after being out of the hospital for about a month, and I told the wife, I said, I ain't been back to Salt Lake in a long time. She said, you haven't? I said, no. I said, let's get the things packed and get out of here. So we packed our clothes and back to Salt Lake we went. We went down to Green River, where I spent my younger life in the 3C camps, and spent a little time there, and we down in New Mexico and on to California, and all around. We roamed around, I guess, for 3 months. Finally had to get back home and try to save up a little more money. We were flat broke.
Yeah.
And we got back, and from that day on now, we've been taking, well, just trips like this. I'll take maybe 8 or 10 of them a year. Okay. And now when I go down to different places, sometimes I'll spend 3 or 4 weeks, sometimes it's just a weekend. You see, I've got another reunion to go to next weekend, next Saturday.
Back east.
Cumberland State Park, Kentucky.
Okay. So you've been basically taking it easy the last few years.
Right.
Good deal.
I spent a lot of time on the road. I have to trade cars every 2 years because they don't last much longer.
Looking back on all the experiences, was the sacrifice worth the success?
Well, the sacrifice, some people say is a lot of sacrifice to it, but to me, it wasn't a sacrifice. To me, it could be one of 2 things. First of all, somebody upstairs is looking over me. If it wasn't that, it's pure dumb luck. That's all you can call it. Okay. Because last July, I was up in Pennsylvania at another Army reunion, I Company, the Eastern Section.
Do something right here. There we go.
He won't eat much. Not can afford it. But I was up in Pennsylvania here last July and had a stroke.
Okay.
For a couple of hours, I had no feeling in my arm, my leg. I'd reach over and scratch my arm. I felt like I was scratching a leather suitcase or something. I'm sitting there. I couldn't talk. I couldn't close one eye. And the wife said, "We're going to get you over to the hospital." And I shook my head no. And, so she kept arguing with me. And after a while, after about an hour, hour and a half, the feeling starts coming back, and I got to where I could talk again. I said, "When we get home, I'll go to the doctor."
Okay.
And so I came all the way back to Ohio, went to the doctor, was in the hospital for a couple of weeks. They found a blood clot at the base of my brain. They got rid of it. There's no lasting effects from that stroke. So what can you call it? Is that dumb luck or what, you know? And I've had so many little things like that happen to me.
Well, you need to take it easy now, and let's not push that luck, no. And be able to come back to many more of these. Thank you very much for taking time to sit down with us and share some of your stories. Yeah. Really appreciate it. Look forward to having you see it.
I'm just glad I had the opportunity.
Good deal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh.